Most people don't lose love because they didn't care. They lose it because they were too comfortable to notice what they had while it was still choosing them. And if you think this is just another relationship talk, stay with me. Because what you're about to hear will make you rethink every moment you ever felt secure with someone who quietly gave you everything. This isn't about breakups, it's about blindness. It's about how the human mind slowly stops respecting what feels guaranteed, how consistency gets mistaken for weakness, and how loyalty gets undervalued until it's no longer available. The most painful realizations in life don't come from betrayal, they come from absence. From the moment you look around and realize the person who once anchored your world is no longer emotionally reachable. Here's the truth no one prepares you for. A good man doesn't disappear loudly. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't beg. He doesn't warn you 10 times before leaving. He fades. He detaches. He grows quiet. And by the time you notice the silence, he has already made peace with losing you. That's when panic begins. Not because he was perfect, but because what he offered was rare. If you've ever thought, "I'll understand," "I won't leave," or "I'll fix it later," this message is for you. Because later is where regret lives. Later is where comparisons begin. Later is where you realize that attention is common, attraction is cheap, but emotional safety is priceless. And if you're the one who gave more than you received, who stayed longer than you should have, who was patient until patience turned into self-betrayal, listen carefully. This is not about proving your worth to someone who couldn't see it. It's about understanding why they only see it once you're gone. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear may not save the relationship you lost, but it might save you from repeating the same mistake again. Taking a good man for granted rarely looks dramatic. There's no single moment where everything breaks, no clear decision to disrespect, undervalue, or dismiss him. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, through comfort, through routine, through the dangerous assumption that what is stable will always remain. Psychologically, the human mind adapts quickly to consistency. What once felt extraordinary slowly becomes expected. And expectation, when unchecked, turns into entitlement. In the early stages, his effort stands out, his reliability feels grounding, his emotional availability feels rare. She feels chosen, prioritized, safe. But over time, the mind stops rewarding what it can predict. The same behavior that once created attraction begins to fade into the background. His presence becomes the baseline instead of the blessing. This is not cruelty. It's conditioning. The brain normalizes patterns, and in doing so, it often erases gratitude. Here's where the deeper shift happens. When a man continues to give without requiring respect in return, the dynamic subtly changes. Not consciously, but psychologically. Boundaries teach people how to value us. When there are none, the mind fills the gap with assumptions. She starts believing that his patience means he doesn't mind being deprioritized, that his understanding means her behavior carries no cost, that his forgiveness means she doesn't have to self-reflect. His emotional maturity gets reinterpreted as emotional tolerance, and this is where many misunderstand the situation. She doesn't stop caring about him. She stops being aware of him. Awareness is what keeps love alive. When someone becomes predictable, the mind stops paying attention. Respect doesn't vanish because she dislikes him. It fades because his presence no longer demands consciousness. He becomes part of the emotional furniture of her life, important but unnoticed. Philosophically, this is one of the oldest human errors. We don't value what is freely given. We value what has weight, cost, and consequence. When his effort feels unconditional, the subconscious reads it as low risk. And low-risk relationships often become low priority, not because she is heartless, but because desire, respect, and value are tied to perceived loss. If the mind believes there is nothing to lose, it behaves accordingly. This is also where attraction quietly erodes. not because he changed, but because polarity did. Strength without boundaries doesn't register as strength. It registers as availability. And unlimited availability removes urgency. She begins to speak more freely, correct him more harshly, delay appreciation, question his leadership. Small moments of disregard pile up, each one seemingly insignificant, yet collectively corrosive. What's important to understand is that she doesn't realize this is happening. From her perspective, she's simply being honest, comfortable herself. From his perspective, something feels off. He senses the shift, but often dismisses it. He gives more, communicates more, explains more. And each time he does without change, he teaches her, again, unconsciously, that his needs are flexible, negotiable, optional. Over time, a quiet imbalance forms. He is investing emotionally while being slowly devalued. And here's the cruel irony. The very traits that made him a good partner, patience, empathy, consistency, are the traits that allow him to be taken for granted. Not because they are flaws, but because without self-respect enforced through action, virtues lose their power. This stage is dangerous because it feels safe. There are no loud fights, no ultimatums, no dramatic exits, just a gradual loss of mutual awareness. And this is why realization comes later, not sooner. Because nothing, bad enough, happened to trigger alarm. Comfort disguised the decline. By the time she notices the distance, the man has already changed internally. He hasn't left yet, but he has started to withdraw emotionally. And that's when the shock begins to form, because the man she assumed was permanent is no longer fully present. The lesson here is uncomfortable but essential. Love doesn't survive on intention alone. It survives on awareness, respect, and boundaries. If you want to be valued, you must allow your presence to be felt and your absence to mean something. And the truth that lingers long after this realization is simple. What you normalize, you teach others to ignore. A good man doesn't leave the moment he feels hurt. That's the first misunderstanding people have. Emotionally mature men are not impulsive. They don't storm out, threaten abandonment, or create chaos to be heard. They stay, they process, they rationalize. They tell themselves it's just a phase, just stress, just miscommunication. And that's exactly why the ending catches everyone by surprise. Psychologically, men like this are wired to endure before they escape. They are problem solvers. When something feels off, their instinct is not to abandon the system but to fix it. So when respect starts slipping or appreciation fades, he doesn't immediately withdraw. He increases effort. He explains himself more clearly. He becomes more patient. He assumes responsibility for emotional gaps that are not entirely his to carry. This is not weakness. It's emotional investment. But here's what quietly happens during this phase. Every time he speaks and feels unheard, a small fracture forms. Every time he compromises his boundaries to keep the peace, something inside him erodes. Every time he gives more without receiving understanding in return, the emotional cost increases. The damage isn't loud, it accumulates. And because there is no dramatic conflict, no one notices the slow internal exit taking place. This is where emotional withdrawal begins. Not as punishment, but as protection. The human psyche cannot stay fully open in an environment where effort feels invisible. When connection starts to feel one-sided, the mind adapts by pulling energy inward. He becomes quieter, less expressive, less reactive, not because he cares less, but because caring has started to hurt his sense of self. What often confuses women at this stage is that the man is still physically present. He still shows up, still does what's required, still fulfills responsibilities. But the emotional texture has changed, the warmth feels muted, the enthusiasm feels gone, and instead of recognizing this as a warning, it's often interpreted as moodiness, stress, or emotional distance that will resolve on its own. After all, he hasn't left, so it can't be serious. That assumption is the mistake. Emotionally, leaving begins long before departure. The moment a man stops trying to be understood, something fundamental has shifted. when he no longer argues his point, no longer explains his feelings, no longer asks for change. It's not peace, it's resignation. Silence is not calm, it is closure in progress. From a philosophical perspective, this is what happens when meaning collapses. Humans can tolerate pain, effort, and sacrifice if they believe it leads somewhere. But when effort feels futile, the psyche disengages. He doesn't withdraw to manipulate. He withdraws because continuing would require betraying his own self-respect. And at some point, survival of the self outweighs survival of the relationship. This is also why the eventual departure feels sudden. To her, it comes out of nowhere. To him, it's the final step of a process that started months, sometimes years earlier. He has already grieved the relationship internally. He has already accepted the loss. By the time he leaves, he is not heartbroken. He is clear. And this clarity is what makes the aftermath so painful. Because when she finally realizes what's happening, she tries to address the external behavior without understanding the internal shift. She notices the distance and attempts to fix it with attention, affection, or promises. But the emotional door is already closing. Not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. You cannot revive a connection once someone has stopped believing in it. The hardest truth here is that emotional withdrawal is not reversible through panic. It requires awareness much earlier, when the man was still speaking, still asking, still hoping. Once hope disappears, love follows quietly behind it. For the man listening, this is not a call to disappear without communication. It's a reminder that your silence should never be the first language you speak. And for the woman listening, it's an invitation to pay attention before effort turns into endurance, and endurance turns into detachment. Because when a good man stops fighting for understanding, he's not giving up on you. He's choosing to stop abandoning himself. Realization rarely arrives through conversation. It doesn't come when someone explains their pain clearly or asks for change one last time. Human beings are not wired to fully grasp value while it is still accessible. We understand importance through contrast, and contrast only appears when something is missing. That is why realization almost always arrives through absence, not explanation. When he was present, his effort blended into the background of her life. His support became expected. His emotional availability became assumed. The very consistency that made him reliable also made him invisible. Psychologically, the mind stops actively registering what feels permanent. Presence feels endless until it isn't. And when it disappears, the brain scrambles to understand what it lost. This is when memory changes shape. Moments that once felt ordinary are replayed with new weight. The way he listened without judgment. The way he stayed calm when things became difficult. The way he showed up without being chased. These qualities don't feel valuable when they are freely given. They feel valuable when there is no one left offering them. Absence sharpens perception in a way presence never can. What's important to understand is that this realization is not purely emotional. It is deeply psychological. The brain equates loss with danger. When a stable emotional anchor disappears, the nervous system reacts. Anxiety replaces comfort. Comparison replaces confidence. Suddenly, she becomes acutely aware of the emotional safety that is no longer available. Not because she wants him back immediately, but because her inner equilibrium has been disturbed. This is also where regret often gets misunderstood. Regret is not always about love. Often, it's about awareness. She becomes aware of the role he played in her life only after it is empty. She realizes how much emotional labor he carried, how much stability he provided, how much chaos he absorbed quietly. And this awareness can feel overwhelming because it comes with the realization that what was lost was not easily replaceable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Explanation rarely creates this awareness. He may have tried to communicate. He may have expressed his needs clearly. He may have asked for change in calm, rational ways, but without emotional consequence, words remain abstract. The mind doesn't reorganize itself around hypotheticals, it reorganizes itself around reality. And reality only shifts when access is removed. This is why last-minute efforts often fail. When she finally feels the loss, she responds from panic, not understanding. She tries to fix externally what was lost internally. More attention, more affection, more promises, but the emotional foundation that made those gestures meaningful has already cracked. You cannot recreate depth once the lesson arrives too late. Philosophically, this speaks to a larger human pattern. We are reactive creatures. We change when the environment forces us to, not when insight is gently offered. Comfort delays growth, loss accelerates it. That doesn't make people cruel. It makes them human, but it does mean that timing matters more than intention. This realization is often accompanied by a quiet sense of humility. She sees that the man she underestimated was not weak for staying. He was strong for enduring, and the strength she once overlooked becomes painfully obvious in his absence. Especially when she encounters others who lack the same depth, patience, or emotional integrity. Comparison becomes the teacher she once ignored. For the man, this phase is rarely visible. He may never know the extent of her realization, and that's important, because the lesson is not meant to bring him back. It's meant to transform how value is recognized in the future. His absence becomes the catalyst for her emotional growth, even if he is no longer part of the story. And this is where maturity quietly enters the conversation. True understanding does not always lead to reconciliation. Sometimes it simply leads to awareness. And awareness, when it comes late, still carries meaning. It shapes future choices. It recalibrates standards. It teaches the cost of inattention. The deeper message here is not about blame. It's about perception. If you only recognize value when it disappears, you will spend your life learning lessons through loss. But if you cultivate awareness while things are still present, you preserve what matters instead of mourning it. Because absence doesn't create value, it reveals it. And by the time you see clearly, the moment to act may already be gone. When a good man finally leaves, the story doesn't end with absence. In many ways, that's where his presence becomes permanent. Not in reality, but in memory, in comparison, in the quiet internal measuring stick that never quite disappears. The man who was once overlooked doesn't vanish from relevance. He becomes the standard by which everything else is judged. This is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable outcomes of taking someone for granted. Because the mind doesn't reset easily. Once you've experienced depth, consistency, emotional safety, and quiet strength, your nervous system remembers it. Even when you move on, even when you meet new people, something inside you keeps comparing. Not consciously at first, but instinctively. The body knows what felt regulated, what felt secure, what felt real. At first, she may believe replacement will be easy. After all, the world is full of options. Attention is abundant. Attraction is accessible, but novelty fades quickly when it lacks substance. Conversations feel shallow. Promises feel performative. Emotional availability feels inconsistent. And slowly, without intending to, she begins to realize that what she lost was not just a person, but a pattern of being cared for that is rare. This is where regret deepens, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, reflective kind. The kind that surfaces in moments of stress, loneliness, or emotional vulnerability, when she needs grounding and realizes there is no one who holds space the way he did, when she needs understanding and realizes patience is not as common as she assumed, when she needs stability and realizes chaos is easy to find, but calm is not. Psychologically, this happens because humans anchor their expectations to past experiences. The highest quality connection we've known becomes the reference point. And once a man like this occupies that role, he cannot be erased. He becomes the benchmark, not because he was flawless, but because he was integrated. He showed up consistently across time, not just in moments of excitement. That kind of reliability imprints deeply. What makes this realization especially painful is that it often arrives alongside growth on his side. Men who leave after being taken for granted rarely stay stagnant. The act of walking away often reconnects them with their self-respect. They refine their boundaries. They invest in themselves. They become more selective, more grounded, more confident. And from a distance, this growth becomes visible. Now the contrast sharpens. The man she once believed she had outgrown appears elevated, not louder, not arrogant, just settled. And that calm confidence is what makes him even harder to replace, because it signals something that cannot be faked. Inner alignment, emotional leadership, self-worth that no longer negotiates for attention. This is also why reconciliation rarely works at this stage. Not because there is no feeling left, but because the dynamic has permanently shifted. He is no longer seeking validation. He is no longer trying to prove value. He knows it. And relationships cannot survive when one person has already transcended the role they once occupied. The door may still exist, but the version of him who would walk through it does not. Philosophically, this speaks to consequence. Not punishment, but reality. Every choice carries an imprint. When someone is undervalued, the cost is not immediate. It arrives later in comparison, in longing, in the quiet awareness that something meaningful was mishandled. And unlike material losses, emotional benchmarks cannot be replaced by abundance. For the man listening, this is not a story about revenge or validation. It's about knowing that walking away with dignity matters. You don't need to be understood immediately for your value to be real. Sometimes distance is what completes the lesson you were never able to teach with words. For the woman listening, this is not about shame. It's about awareness. The standard you ignore today may become the absence you measure everything against tomorrow. And life rarely gives us unlimited chances to recognize value while it's still within reach. The deeper truth is simple, but confronting it changes behavior. People don't always lose love because it wasn't real. They lose it because they didn't know how to hold it. And the moment that truth lands is the moment everything else becomes clearer. What you fail to value when it's present will return as a standard you can't forget.